From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your Professional Misfits. Hello friends, all the way from Sydney, Australia. I am your host, Christopher Sellers.
And from Portland, Oregon, I'm Brody Ipox.
And we are your Professional Misfits, and we brought a friend. Say hi, Dan.
Hello! It's great to be with you guys.
Good to see you. Folks, this is Dan Manning, all the way from Alabama. So, Brody, your side of the world. And season 2, on episode 5, we're talking about collaboration, so professional collaboration. And I brought in Dan from LinkedIn as former U.S Airforce Pilot, Deputy Director of Regional Affairs, a speechwriter for senior personnel, and a Master's in International Relationships. He's also spent a bit of time in Mongolia and loves Mongolian heavy metal. Is that an accurate summary, Dan?
So I lived in Kyrgyzstan, but I do love Mongolian heavy metal, who are amazing.
So fun fact. And the reason I brought in Dan specifically on this conversation is we've had this discussion, debate, conversation before around collaboration, specifically creativity. So does it work? Is it effective? I'm in the creative sphere. I sit more in the camp of not really, or let's challenge this assumption. Dan, being ex-military, is obviously a teams guy, so sees a lot of value in this. And Brody, you're probably somewhere in the middle. So in this conversation, gents, this is what we're going to unpack, not just for creativity, but collaboration in general, is when it works, when it doesn't work, why doesn't it work, what it is effective at, and really get into that sort of dynamic. Because one of the things I challenge specifically in my book, Applied Creativity, is this notion of collaboration is the best process, the only process, and this is how we solve and develop all of the things. So, Dan, I'll start with you. If we're talking about collaboration and working with other people, what does it really mean to you? What's the value of it? And where do you see it as effective as opposed to, let's say, individual skill and talent or intelligence?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. So,
Cool,
so when I talk about collaboration, the basic definition that I use is 2 or more people working together for a common goal. So we've got 3 of us on here. We're trying to have a discussion about collaboration. So by some respects, we are collaborating.
Collaborating about collaboration.
100%. So, my Air Force career, the first part of it, I was a fighter pilot in the A-10, which is a single seat aircraft. And I had my choice of which aircraft I wanted to go to. And that was the one that I picked. And when my commander asked me, well, why do you want to go to the A-10? I said, because I want every decision to be mine. Good or bad, it's my decision. I want to own that decision. I had just seen a video of a crew in a F-15E that has a backseater as well. And while a weapon was in the air, the backseater is like targeting it. No, okay, we're going to hit this building. No, we're going to hit this building. No, we're going to hit this car. No, this building. Like, I don't want that. If I'm making a life or death decision, I want to be the one to hold all of that responsibility. So for the first part of my military career, it was very much a single seat mentality. And of course, you're collaborating with people on the ground, you're collaborating with other people in your flight, and you could never do it by yourself. But I had this idea that all the best thinking happened by myself. But it wasn't until I got to more senior levels, and especially once I left the Air Force and started my own business and started working with other people, that I realized that I was wrong, that my best thinking happens when I'm thinking with others. And that's how I became a real fan of collaboration and finding better ways to collaborate, seeking out more people with whom I could collaborate to come up with better solutions.
That's awesome. A very accurate and succinct analogy and study, so I appreciate that. That's a solid start. Brody, you have to follow that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. No, it actually it gets me curious. So when you're doing the single man stuff, you talked a little bit about collaboration. Even though you were the one making the decisions, you were the one with sole responsibility, there was still a level of reliance on your team there, was there not?
Oh, 100%. The role of the A-10 is all about supporting troops on the ground, right? So when you show up, you're not the main act. You're there to support people that are on the ground doing their work. So everything that you do is in support of that ground commander and what they are wanting to do. So certainly you're collaborating with them to do it, but inside my flight, if I'm the flight lead, and the weapons that we choose and how we choose to attack, that's my responsibility that I'm not going to give up.
Yeah, right. And you said that changed for you at one, within the military experience. Was there ever a point that you felt like you needed a team?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I got to higher ranks and higher level positions, for a year I was working out of the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar. So this is where we were leading the day-to-day air operations against ISIS, and I was responsible for executing that daily plan. We had 20 different countries that were part of that coalition. We're all working out of the same building. We've got the best trained people from each of these countries. We've got the world's most advanced technology, and we have virtually an unlimited budget. Nobody ever said, hey, don't spend so much money fighting ISIS. If you need it, spend it, but we'll figure it out. And everything was good until one day, ISIS developed their own Air Force. And what they developed were these small drones, right? They're pretty common now, even in Ukraine, but these small quadcopter drones, they attached grenades to them. At first, the grenades didn't fall very well, so they 3D printed some back ends. Then they put badminton shuttlecocks into the back so they could fall like arrows. And they were not militarily powerful, but if a drone's flying over you with a grenade, you're going to pay attention to that. So they were pretty effective at creating this distraction. And all the people in the military over there at the time were looking at this problem and trying to make some analogy to past problems that we had encountered. So they were all trying to fight this problem as if they were fighting mortars that were coming in or car bombs. Like, well, when it shows up, we'll just shoot it down. Like, all right, well, that's good. If it shows up, then let's shoot it down. But let's see if we can find a more creative way, because ISIS was very creative in what they had developed. Let's see if we can find a more creative way so that they don't show up. So I put together a team. I gave us a 2-week deadline to tell the 3-star, here's some things that you can do to start rolling back this threat. And I collected people from different parts of our organization that had different pieces of knowledge, all different pieces of the problem. I brought them together. We were able to have some discussions where people could share their authentically held beliefs. We all learned more about the overall problem. And in the end, we came up with solutions that we were able to apply quickly. And we were able to start rolling back the threat and start having some impact there. And then as ISIS lost territory, they were never able to regain their capability. But it was only because we brought people together to come up with it. I
remember, for your context, Brody, I remember Dan and I did a live about a year ago, maybe a year and a bit more ago, and it was specifically on this, on collaboration and creativity. And this was the story and the anecdote and example that Dan gave. Like, well, this was the problem, and only by collaborating could we come up with a solution and an effective strategy to combat that. So, is that not creative? And is that not the best use of multiple intelligences to reach an outcome? And that was a really, really interesting discussion. But Brody, I wanted to get your take, as a slightly different world in media marketing, on how so for Dan specifically, it might be collaborating with crew or other intelligences to come up with a solution. There's different forms of collaboration. For instance, let's say sponsors wanted to come onto the show, Brody, and we're going to take their money, or even just interpersonally collaborating as founders. Like, where do you sit on the scale?
So, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. I've been on so many teams. I've been a part of so many startups that, collaboration is a necessity. You can't really operate without each other. But in the same sense, I've seen a lot of star players carry entire organizations.
Right.
And that's a tough spot to be. And so for me, being that guy that kind of outside in, helping with things developmentally, eyes and stuff is part of the org, but I'm not really there. I've gotten to see a lot of that stuff. And for me, it's made it hard to seek out collaboration, especially if I kind of get the sense that, the organization or the individual kind of operates on that level. So it's something that I wouldn't say that I necessarily shied away from, but I wasn't actively seeking. I thought, okay, there's certain things I can do on my own. I don't need a group or individuals to support me in those. So that's what I'm going to do. And kind of the same thing as Dan said, and it's for my sole responsibility, right? Like I'm the one responsible. I'm the one here. And to all intents and purposes too, I'm the one that the work is credited to. And that sounds a little bit of the ego thing, but when it comes to marketing and sales, you need that kind of like trackable reference point. Who is responsible? And so for that was really important for me for a really long time. I needed to be the one responsible. But now, working with you, working with Westport in my current role, it's becoming more clear to me that if there's a strong partnership in the collaboration, you're going to go way fucking farther than if you were to try to attempt anything on your own. So it's like I said, it's a mixed bag for me to where I think certain situations you can take the track alone and it might even suit you. So, right. But I think in kind of the grand picture, you're not accomplishing what you could without a team.
Interesting.
It's
so so my experience is probably more opposite to Dan's, and I know you're in the middle grounds. Like I'm more of a solo kid, and I don't know. It's funny, like there's some similarities between being an Air Force pilot and being on stage, because you know your lines, you know your roles, you know everything that you have to execute that's within your control. However, if I'm working opposite someone, I'm relying on you to know your lines too. I'm relying on, stage managers and lighting and sound to hit their cues, without me having to ask. So we're starting to get into the details of understanding what is personal responsibility and skill set and within your control, and how you sort of collaborate, functionally. Everyone has that sort of thing. I guess it's interesting when I getting to the Misfits and getting into working on the other project, Brody, like in the Misfit documentary. Dan, I'll unpack it later.
Great.
But actually, I think I posted about it a couple of weeks ago, and you actually commented, like, I'm working on 2 projects where basically I'm learning to trust other people.
Yeah.
And Dan rather cheekily goes, sounds like you're, beginning to collaborate. And I'm like, you smart ass. But it's true in a certain respect. But Brody, we talked a little bit about this, when we're discussing like what makes a good business partner, and there's very clearly roles and responsibilities that are yours and mine, that haven't been dictated, but have been more adopted and taken ownership of. And what's interesting, and I guess here's where we start to draw some fences around what's collaborative and what's autonomous or independent, is that, Brody, if I came to you and said, this is what we're going to do as the back end of YouTube, and I start dictating to you what your terms are, Dan, this is where, like, what are the boundaries of collaboration to make it effective? Because no one ever is like, who the fuck are you to tell me how to do my job? Like it's when like the sound, the lighting technician goes, hey Chris, you should really deliver this line like that, because that'd be kind of cool and get laughs. And it's like, what? Like you have no skill set, you have no experience or expertise, but you, via observation, want to tell me, and we've all experienced this in some sort of capacity. So this sort of starts to lead to my next grounds of discussion of what are our biggest frustrations with collaboration. Because Dan, when we last spoke about a year and a bit ago around this sort of process, what we both agreed on is there obviously has to be some very clear facilitation. Like someone's got to run this show. There's the idea of having 10 people in a room and you all have equal voting power and democratic choice. Like it's a recipe for fucking disaster, if you want to get anything done. So someone needs to be in charge. So there's a little bit of a framework and a structure that needs to be, in place for collaboration to be effective. Would you
Yeah,
agree?
100%, right? Collaboration is not consensus, right? So the way that I
Great
approach
point.
collaboration is still, there is some person who holds, we would say holds the hammer in the fighter pilot world, but holds the authority to make the decision. And it is my job as a collaborator in that role to help them to stretch their thinking, to look for things maybe they didn't consider, to give them a fresh perspective. But in the end, like, I legitimately don't care whether they use my ideas or not. My function is not to have my idea adopted. My function is to help them to think better. So I have friends who are, in the startup world, and I since we last talked, I've done a lot of work with startups. I'm a startup mentor, and I think I've written like 300 stories for startups in the past year. Wow. But I am there to help the other person to see things that they would not see on their own. Like, here's the real reason I'm a fan of collaboration, because my brain is a liar. My brain will tell me something is good when it's not. It'll tell me something is shit when it's not. It'll tell me that doing one thing is good for me when it's not, and doing another thing is bad for me when it's actually good for me. And I need other people to check my brain against, to help me to figure out whether it's lying or telling the truth. So I have great friends that go ahead.
No, I was going to dive in because there's yes. And this is something, creatively speaking, I'd argue that creative skills proficiency and craft can teach you. And I did a quick carousel on it, and it's basically the creative rule of 10, right? And so your first idea will be shit. Whatever it is, it'll be shit. And even though it feels like, oh, inspiration, amazing, lightning bolt hit me out of nowhere. No. It's normally a version of something that you've seen or heard or someone else has said before, normally, because it's sitting right at the top of your subconscious. And so that's idea number one. So give me 5 more ideas. So you work through those, and they'll be shit too. So there's 6. But the deeper you go and the more you sharpen this blade, you sharpen this skill and hone this craft, you get down to 8, 9, 10. And then somewhere within those 10, there'll be a more solid gem of, is it self-doubt? Is it insecurity? Is it something that I've heard before or seen before? So you can critically assess. Now, like any skill, like any fitness, the more you do it, the faster your process and all these sorts of things. So while I don't at all dismiss getting key feedback from people who know what the fuck they're talking about. Like, if you ever write a book or write a film, never show it to your family. Because they'll say one of two things. It's great, because they want to protect your feelings, or I don't get it, it's shit, and it completely shatters your world, right? This is why you independently go to an editor who knows what a book is and what it needs to accomplish and can give you constructive feedback, right? So that's another key aspect of collaboration. Like, if you're asking the wrong people, you're just going to get shit in, shit out. So sorry, Dan, I'll let you continue.
No, that's 100% true, right? So there is a skill both to being a collaborative partner and in asking for collaboration, right? So I've got a set of friends that I go to with ideas, and they know that I'm showing up, that my identity is not tied to this one idea. I think it's a good idea, and I try it out on them, and I see what questions do they ask, what comes up for them, what is something that doesn't make sense. They give me a few other pieces. We almost restrict that conversation to that piece of the thing that we're talking about, and then we move on and talk about something else. And then when they have an idea, they come to me and we do the same thing.
So that in particular is a really, really valuable trait, especially for all the folks at home. So if you can share the concept or idea objectively, and I guess without attachment. And
What's
that's
that
something
phrase
I wanted
you always use? What's that? You use that phrase with me all the time, Chris. It's not.
Oh, we discuss the idea, not the person.
Yes,
so
thank you.
You put the idea on the table, right?
Yep. It's not the person presenting it; it's the idea that we're talking.
Yeah, thanks, B. Now, and this is something I guess specifically that I wanted to touch on, that I've observed that military and armed services do exceptionally well, which is different from corporate. And as an outside civilian and observer who's consulted and worked with both, and this is a critical difference, is that military in general and those folks, it's what's the thinking and the idea to solve the problem, and it's really problem focused, separate from the individual. Where in corporate, it's normally I'm championing me and my cause. in order for recognition or reward or promotion or for politics or even to play that game. So if my boss or manager recommends something, that's a great concept, right? And so we can't deny, if we're talking about collaboration, you cannot extrapolate social dynamics, and biases from this process. And that's something that I really respect, particularly in certain fields of military, and also because they will look outside, how do we do it in our box? The fact that I was even hired to like design the hotel room is a testament to that. Like a fucking, acting, professional consultant brought into a field completely left of center. But the value they got from it was immense because they were looking for something specific and had the awareness of, we need someone who doesn't think like us to see the things that we don't see. Right. And so it's that unknown, which, military folks get. But corporate, less likely so. And even when they outsource collaboration for project solution strategy, they'll normally come back with something. They'll go with people that they know and they feel comfortable with, and they'll come back with something that's familiar, which is why all this shit looks the same. And you run into a lot of problems like we did, in COVID and still now. So there's this part of collaborating effectively, one would reason, is finding expertise outside of like your comfort zone and your circle to also vet, your process and your thinking.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
The friction of, I mean, it's what produces the best results, right? I mean, if there's no opposition to any idea and you're just shooting shit to the wind, I mean, really, when is it gonna find definition? Because and I don't know if you necessarily for sure need people for that. Chris, you had mentioned earlier that you can kind of go through your own process in that way, but I think you get, like I said, the best results when it is challenged by another way of thinking. It's not my way of thinking that I'm continuously boiling down to a point that I'm like, okay, this is diluted of shit enough that I can accept it. It's someone actually bolstering the best pieces of your idea, bringing unique insights of theirs, and then it becomes something completely new and stronger in that sense.
In an ideal world,
Right.
So,
right.
like in our experiences, like where does, and because we've all been there, like where does collaboration not work? Like where is it frustrating? And this is something I touch on the book as well. It's like if we're talking about creativity, and if you're relying on collaboration to be creative, what happens when you don't have your team, for instance? Or what happens if you're in a shit team? Or like, does that suddenly mean that your intelligence and your skill set is suddenly diminished because you're not surrounded by equally creative and inspiring people? And I would argue, no. Like you can develop all of these skills to a very, very high level for yourself, right? And so what happens then if we're in a room where, like you said, Dan, like collaboration isn't consensus, but so often collaboration becomes a democratic process, or everyone deserves to have a voice and all the ideas should go down on paper. And you go, that's fucking ridiculous. It reminds me, actually, it's a great episode. It's a great episode in the British version of The Office where they're like, everyone get their ideas on the paper, and Keith's like, we should have a wet t-shirt competition. And it's like, we shouldn't. That's no. We just need some girls and a bucket. Because, like, but the rules of collaboration are like every idea is allowed to get down on a piece of paper. So when doesn't it work, and what are the biggest frustrations and challenges?
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah. So in my mind, it's the leader's responsibility to set the conditions to allow it to work, right? So in the example I was talking about in Qatar, in those sessions in particular, I did some relatively subtle things to let people know that this isn't a standard military operation where I'm in charge of this idea driving. Like, for instance, I didn't sit in the chair at the head of the table. Every time you walk into a room, the highest ranking person sits in that chair. You know who's in charge, and now you're going to defer to whatever they say. So I didn't, right? I sat on the edge to communicate, like, we're We were actually sharing ideas. The people that were invited were legitimate subject matter experts in their subject, and they were volunteers. Nobody was forced to come to this. If you wanted to work on this problem, then show up. So there were good people there, right? Where it goes wrong is when you have a leader who doesn't do that. And this is my biggest complaint about brainstorming in particular, because people all the time say, oh, let's do some brainstorming on this. And what they really mean is, we're going to go into a room, I'm going to tell you what I think, then we're going to spend 20 minutes, you tell me I'm right. And then we'll leave and we'll do exactly what I said in the first place. And that does not work, right? Because now people are editing themselves to respond in the way that they believe whoever's leading it wants a response. So rather than having the benefits of my cognitive biases being offset by other people, instead, one person's cognitive biases infects everybody. And so you end up probably even worse off than if you had not collaborated at all.
And is that not, because I understand from your other friend, Dan, as well, who's also in the military, he's commented often that like creativity, for instance, is rewarded on the battlefield, but like punished in the boardroom. Because like you were explaining, there's a very strict hierarchy and it's there for a reason. And you don't challenge and you don't question and you don't, say, well, I disagree and make your case, which from what you were saying before, Brody, like if there's no pushback, if there's no critical analysis, if there's no, where are we going and what are we doing and why are we doing this? Like, and those are fundamental questions one should ask. So, and I absolutely agree with you, Dan, that like collaboration relies entirely on the facilitator. And that's something that I also discuss of like, look, you might have the greatest idea in the world, but if it's not recognized or can't be translated or understood by whoever it happens to be, like a peer, a manager, a partner, if they don't get it, good for you, Archimedes, like the world is still flat. Like, and this is now I'll be very, very clear. This is a double-edged sword because, of course, every artist thinks they're a genius, and it is just categorically not fucking true. But likewise, like not every new idea is a great idea, and that's part of what I like to deconstruct in the book is like you can objectively assess these things, but unless the powers that be, said facilitator, can understand it, can understand where it's going, and knows how to effectively shape a vision while still being open to new ideas, new concepts, going left instead of going right. Now, that's not an easy thing to balance overall. B, you've got that thoughtful look on your face.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of like to Dan's point. Like, I think the leader there's a large amount of facilitation that happens there, right? But then it, not to counter you guys too much here, but I think it also falls on the individual members of the team as well. Because like you're saying, it's that, can I trust your skill level? Can I trust your commitment? Can I trust your engagement in this thing to where, like you were saying, Dan, you are bringing your highest cognitive thought against mine. It isn't just this kind of ego stroking that we were talking about. And, I think that takes more than just the leader. And again, that's the collaborative piece there, right? Because I really, truly think you could probably have the greatest leader in the world, but if you had a bunch of dumbasses that aren't really willing to challenge themselves in their own critical thinking, it's that story that I was telling. You're watching the superstar drag the ship, and it's like, fuck, dude, he's gonna burn out quick. Like that's not a collaborative situation there. So it's each person has some weight in this thing. You know what I mean? Regardless whether it's the leader or the team. And I'm just curious where you guys are with that.
I mean, so I think the team. Like you have to show up with some domain knowledge, right? You can't be. I follow a lot of Teresa Amabile's work. Harvard psychologist, studied creativity her entire career. Right? She says that any person can be creative if they have domain knowledge, right? They have enough expertise to be able to think beyond the current state onto something else. They have some basic, creative skills, and they have an intrinsic motivation to come up with a solution, because most ideas are shit, right? Most ideas are not going to work.
Correct.
And
Right.
being able to, at a very early stage, separate good ideas that will work from ideas that will not work is really, really tough. And history is full of stories of people believing something would work and it didn't, or dismissing some other idea that came around. So you have to get people on your team who bring some domain knowledge or are willing to use their own personal experience maybe to offer some different perspective. And then you as the leader need to know, like, when you go to which person for which pieces of insight.
Yeah.
Chris, that's like your analogy earlier with you want to start a restaurant, you don't hire 5 chefs.
Yeah. We're talking about business partners, Dan, for instance, and if you having differing but complementing skill sets. So if I'm going to open a restaurant, and if I'm a chef, I'm not going to hire 5 other chefs, which is what most business owners will do. Like, I'll hire my friends because we all like the same thing, and we'll start a thing, and there's a reason it collapses under its own weight. Whereas I'll be the chef. I'm going to hire someone that's front of house. Or I'm going to find someone that can work front of house. I'm going to find an accountant, to keep all of this shit in line. And yeah, Theresa Amabile, I cite her in the book as well, because what she calls domain experience, I call linear skill sets. So for everyone at home who hasn't read the book, like, linear skill sets is anything that can be taught and falls into the realm of technical expertise, education, experience, right? Actors are trained. There is no such thing as a natural actor. You might have certain talents that lend itself nicely to performance or whatever it happens to be, but you need to be trained to remember lines, stagecraft, how to hold your body, keep yourself fit, project your voice to the back of the room. All of these things can be taught. It's not magic. And the same is true for surgeons, for chefs, for pilots, for everything, right? Skill sets can be taught. My argument is, like, you can also teach the creative skill sets that then marry with these linear skill sets, which is why you see creativity in performance, in social media, in strategy and Warcraft. All of these things, like, creative skills are universal and they apply, but that's beside the point. That's what you're saying about domain experience is accurate. And this is where I guess I'll take the flip side of the approach as well. If we stick with chefs and, we've all got ingredients and we want to cook a meal, am I going to listen to the other 9 people in the room who've all brought something from home? Or am I going to listen to the executive chef? So that there are occasions, and I know there's a proliferation of it on LinkedIn because everyone's a fucking expert, but there are occasions where there are individuals in the room who know their shit on that subject. If I came to you, Dan, and said, well, actually, I watched Maverick and I believe that, and start to school you, and you should listen to me because, and this is, so, and and that's the problem often, because often people like that are leading the room of, let's come up with a solution. Here's my idea. But if I insist on, and generally I'm not even going to be aware of it, but if I'm dismissing you, if I'm, disqualifying you, if I'm making excuses of, like, why your ideas won't work or whatever else, you're gonna have problems.
So here's a couple of things. Like, one, and in doing the story work that I do with startup founders, right? They have some idea, they've devoted their time and attention and their energy into this. They're an expert in that solution, but they need to communicate it to someone else. And I help them to bridge that, right? To distill down what they're doing and communicate it. So in that way, I am collaborating with them. And I may not, and in fact, I'm usually not an expert in the domain that they are an expert in, but I can't put myself in the role of the customer. So even in your example about the chefs, and you have the executive chef, and you have, the maybe a waiter who brought something, from home, it depends on what I'm trying to do, right? If I'm trying to create a fine dining, French cuisine style experience, then maybe this person doesn't have the knowledge. But if I'm trying to create something that appeals to a broader market, and I'm able to incorporate some flavors from the cuisine that this person knows along with this cuisine, then I can create something stunning that I never would have had done myself. and one trip to Tokyo, I had Parmesan ramen. Like I didn't know those. I didn't know those two things went together, but
Yeah.
the umami works in both of them, and I never would have put those together. But at some point, somebody said, "Let's have ramen." They said, "I got all this Parmesan. Let's put it on top of it." And it turns out to be something that's good that probably would not have happened if they had been separated. So as the leader, or if you're in this formal facilitation role, what I try to do is I try to find this kernel of goodness in something that the person said, and see if we can build on that, which is another one of Osborne's rules for brainstorming. So even in the wet t-shirt contest, all right, we know we're not going to have a wet t-shirt contest, but what are some other ways that we might be able to gamify this thing that we're talking about? But the last thing I'll say on this is that you, by not like just outrageously dismissing the obviously shit idea, you let the other person who actually does have an idea that might be good, but they're concerned about, should I say it? If you dismiss that outrageous idea as being completely outrageous, get out of here, it's going to shut them down as well. So as long as they're not being offensive, we can maybe build on it. That's one that later that'll be crossed off the list. We're not going to accidentally have a wet t-shirt contest, right? That one will be gone, and we'll forget about it, and we'll go on to something that's better.
Yeah. Brody, you've got that look.
Yeah, just interesting. The conversation you and I had on collaboration, and then the most recent conversation we had with going commando. It's just it just seems that there's that common theme, and I don't know if I was outside of class and I just didn't get the notes, but I think I've been missing out on collaboration and really being around people that have the right insights to how to do it correctly. You and I work really well together, and you're kind of helping me get clarity as to why that does work the way that it does. You and I have conversations often, but before I would have kind of spent the next who knows how long kind of aimlessly searching for this, these kind of examples, these kind of creative insights into this process that I think, like you said, Dan, a lot of people don't feel they have the permission to speak on yet because something beforehand got shut down, right? Or some kind of conversation went awry, and now I have no room and I have no grounds. But Chris, with our, positions with each other, it's open, man. It's open. If we have something to say to each other, we say it, and if there's something collaboratively, we bring it to the table, and it's like, hey, will you look at this? Tell me what it looks like to you. And yeah, it's just interesting. I was, not thrown off, but I'm surprised at how synergetic a lot of these conversations are around this.
Do you think? Yeah, I would agree. Dan, do you think a lot of the process is, especially even when it's done well, it's intuitive, which is why to an outsider it appears easy. And so if you observe process from afar, you go, "Oh, they've just done this, this, and this," when actually there's a very high level of give and take, of discussion, of challenge. For all that's what good collaboration is. It's like you and I to reach an outcome. It's not about you and I. It's not about scoring points necessarily. It's to reach a mutually beneficial outcome. And I guess like the reason I ask is, so the example I give in the book is Jack Welch and GE, and his insistence at the board is the way they would brainstorm or come up with ideas is you get the no, not even you show up on the day, you all sit around the table, here's the problem, here's the idea, here's the strategy, and basically you have open, loud, robust discussions in the boardroom then and there, and it's decided. And Jack Welch, massive advocate for this, because like you open challenge with candor and robust discussion, because you got to believe in your idea and you got to put it out there and you've got to argue your case and all these sort of things. And I remember this post came out on LinkedIn at least 3 years ago, because I commented on it and I make an example of it in the book and go, this seems to equate loud with productive. And for all the introverts in the room, we know that's not true. Like some people will get a lot out of going to Dan's session, sitting, observing, taking notes, going away, processing for a day or two or whenever, then coming back and saying, this is what I've been playing with. And this is actually the research that I've done. This is what's happened before, but this is how I think we could do it differently, for instance. So the other, that's why I asked, because the often brainstorming collaboration is generally live, dynamic, now, in the moment. We hash it out here, and that's where we get it. And another argument, and I know I've made a video about this, is like, no. How about we set the task, set the project? Here's the challenge. There you go. Come back to me in your own time. Like, there is a deadline for all things. There is a deadline, but process this in whatever way you need to, like interpersonally. If you want to work in little pods and work with other people, fine. If you want to research it on your own, you want to go for a long work. If you want to be me and sit in a cafe, drink espresso and draw it out in a journal, great. Come back by deadline, and then let's discuss solutions. So do you have a take on that in terms of like the collaboration that is, forcibly is forced and dynamic, real time in the moment for whatever reason, as opposed to an effective process?
Yeah, I mean, so I was rereading that that chapter in preparation for our conversation today as well. So like one of the things that I have to be very aware of for myself when I'm collaborating with others is that once I form an opinion, I've usually thought about it for a long time, right? I've thought about it at multiple levels. I've usually done academic research on it. I've tested it against other things that I've thought, and I have a firm hold often on an idea. So I'm not going to give it up easily, but I can't if I have to let the other person. I can't attack the other person for having some different view, right? I have to create the space to allow them to offer their view. And I think the idea of we're going to go into the boardroom and we're going to present a problem, we're going to hash it out and make a decision in this one session is might be appropriate in the greatest of emergencies, but should not be the normal way that you would operate. If you are operating that way, you've probably failed.
And to qualify, like the reason why this was of import to Jack Welch is he argued like this is the most productive. This is how you move companies and organizations to make decisions at speed to get all the team in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. And that's the way that it's done in order to make productive, constructive decisions.
Yeah, I mean, okay, but my experience, and even in yes. higher pressure situations, fighting against ISIS or in legit life and death, like international calamity, situations, you don't have. In those genuine situations, you don't have the time to do that, right? You have to have set the stage before that to allow people to know when they can speak up. You have to be very clear as a leader on this person has valuable input that is directly related to this. You close the circle of people that you're talking to because I have to make a decision quickly or I lose my ability to make any decision, and now just things happen. The times when that is actually the case are very, very thin. Like we'd like to imagine that it happens more often than it does, but it's pretty rare. But so for those other cases where I'm going to go into a boardroom type discussion and we're going to go through and I know that we're going to be talking through some ideas, like the best practice is to let people know a few days ahead of time. Let people know, here's the thing we're going to be talking about. Here's sort of the parameters. Here's maybe the constraints that we're doing, because what you do is you allow particularly the introverts to spend time thinking about it. If your boss tells you, hey, in 2 days, we're going to have this discussion, I would love to hear some ideas. When you're walking down the hall, when you're driving home, when you're in the shower, your brain is working on those ideas so that when you show up, you have something to say. Now, it's not been checked against maybe other knowledge in the room, but everybody has a chance to say something that's thoughtful. And now you're able to build off of those ideas to get to something great. And that's how you can sort of start to balance that. The introverts versus the extroverts of the room, where the extroverts just do their thinking out loud and the introverts are quiet until the time's up and now the meeting's over and they never get a chance to say anything.
Yeah. B, I don't know if we finally got to an answer to this, but like, do we collaborate on this?
I see. That's where
It's a
I'm
deep
at.
breath.
That's
It's
what.
a deep breath, man.
Well, that's what I was trying to get to. You know, prior to this last point, is like with the example to leadership and then the team, right? You know, there's just certain circumstances where you know, and your question to Dan, right? Is it intuitive? Like, there's certain pieces of me that like catch the way that you and I work, and I'm like, I didn't have to say anything to him. I didn't have to say a fucking word. I didn't have to explain anything. We were working on a common task, knew by, you know, whatever means his end of the application to that task, and it's already done. It's already said and done. That's you know, that's intuition there. You know, Chris senses it, picks it up, does it. You know, we don't really necessarily in my mind have an opportunity to, you know, under the formal sense, collaborate, you know, like. And
I'll give you an example and I'll pull back the curtain on the Misfits.
please.
We were discussing we took a little break before recording season 2, where everyone should know by now. And so in those weeks, we're sorting out, all right, strategy, Patreons, here's, there's, everywhere, all these sort of things. How are we going to do it? How are we going to go about it? A lot of moving pieces and everything else. And this is the second time that someone has consciously done this to me. It's like, it's you, Brody, and it's Robbie. And you've both known me well enough and learned me to do the same thing, which is interesting. But so Brody comes to the table and he's like, so here's what I'm thinking in terms of what we have for content and the platforms. I'm just going to give that to you. And I just want to hear what you have to say. See, you're giggling, you motherfucker, because you know that you do it. So basically, Brody and Robert over here, you know, in the building the app, they both come to me with like a box full of blocks and go, hey, this is what I found. And they just like kind of tip the blocks out in front of me. It's like, I'm just going to let you play for a minute.
I'm going to walk away for a second.
Bitches. And so then I'll construct whatever it is I construct in the 2 or 3 minutes that we'll chat. And Brody goes, yeah, perfect. Thanks. He's like, and then, you know, so I'll autistically map out a complete overarching strategy for Patreon, tie it to Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the things, how we don't need to create more content. We can repurpose it here, there, but still give exclusive. Basically, design a strategy which would take months in the space of 5 minutes. Brody just giggles and goes, do you have any idea how much people would pay for this? And for me, I'm just playing with blocks. Robert does exactly the same thing with the app. He goes, hey, I've just got this idea. I'm going to give you this much. I'm not going to give you my thinking. Because I want to. So if we talk about intuition, it's you very clearly have come to understand how I operate without me even knowing, which is somewhat.
I'm glad you're working
annoying.
It out here.
But now I feel like a puppy that's being handled, but it's not gonna stop me from doing it. But in terms of that's it, that intuitively sort of fell into where the roles are. Where like Brody sort of has the pieces, brings the pieces, says, there you go, I'll build the thing. Brody goes, cool, thanks, takes the thing away, and then makes it work in the background. So he puts all the strategy into place, goes, this is how it will funnel through all the platforms. And that's a skill set I do not have. And I don't quite understand. So when he's doing that, I'll sort of okay, we're doing a Patreon, and I'm like, bro, who's gonna pay for this? And he's like, you don't understand. Like, I've got, hundreds of clients over here who don't have half the engagement that we do, and blah, 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 blah. And to your point, Dan, like, I know nothing, but have to sort of allow this space of going, well, I don't know, but I trust Brody and what we're building together. This aligns to where we're going. So I'll just have to be sort of uncomfortable and sort of play in the dark for a bit and see how this thing manifests.
A little bit of blind collaboration is what that
is. Well, I was going to ask, like, this is probably the last secret uncomfortable element in both creativity and collaboration, is like accepting something that if I don't know something, and if I'm opening it out to the public, and that sort of level of vulnerability, for challenging ideas. And then if we're going to go somewhere that we've never been before, design something that's never been done before, that there's always going to be that little element of like, oh, fuck, what if we're looking stupid? What if we're calling our shot and we strike out? right? But you need to be prepared and have the capacity to take that on. Is that not an element?
Yeah, 100%. Right. So like I also make some lessons for the Department of Defense, the Department of State as well. And when I talk about collaboration there inside these giant bureaucracies, when we talk about creativity, we tend to focus on like the ideation, on the brainstorming session where people are coming up with like, oh, let's try this idea. But that by itself is worthless. There's nothing that comes from that. Even Teresa Amabile's definition is that creativity is the production of ideas that are new and useful. Like something actually gets produced and put into the world. Just having the idea is
Which
only
I
the very first
disagree
step.
with.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's something that we talked about originally. It's like that's an awfully limited view. But anyway, please continue. Yes, collaboration.
So you have this. You have the people that go in and they ideate and they come up with all these different, maybe wild ideas, and maybe some of them will work. And maybe if you do 100, there might be 2 that are plausible ideas. But those people in the room at that time aren't the ones that maybe are the best suited to pick out those ideas because they've now been maybe infected by this other discussion. So you have a separate group of people who now are looking at them maybe more critically and saying, all right, here are the 2 or 3 things we're going to do. And then even those people on your team that are always, I call them the no patrol. Like, that's not going to work. We can't do that. That's illegal. We don't have the money. Like even they play a role in this process because you want to hear their no's. And you can evaluate, whoever the leader is can evaluate, are those legit? Are those things that I can overcome? And then the last thing that I'll say here is the people that come up with the ideas are often not the best people to sell those ideas to others.
I would agree.
Because they're the misfits, right? There's the podcast that we're on here, right? They're the people who are they go against the grain. They take a little bit of pride in being a little bit counter to what everybody else is thinking, and they've sort of staked out their position there. But the people who are going to persuade someone to actually adopt the idea, they're often more flexible. They're often better communicators. They're often able to understand not just the value of the idea, but the value of the experience of the person that they're presenting it to. And now, if you didn't have that person, your idea wouldn't go anywhere anyway. So the collaboration is more than just the people sitting in the room with sticky notes. It can be the entire team that goes from here's the problem to here's a solution that's actually in action.
I really agree a lot with that. I mean, part of, for what it's worth then, so outside of this, building an app, a fintech app, which is apparently going to turn into a bigger deal than I expected. But basically, Robbie's my co-founder on that, and he's that guy. And he's Swedish. He recently went back to Sweden to visit his mum, and while he was there, just happened to get the opportunity to pitch this to 2 Swedish investors. And I was saying to Brody, because we were discussing this in the Misfit documentaries, like, I'm super grateful that it's Robert because I'm not sales. And again, greatest idea in the world. It will prove out to be one of the most disruptive concepts, but it is unlikely. 1, I had the relationships to pitch to. 2, even if I did, Robbie has the business speak knack, and so can understand me as a visionary and will let me do my thing, and then I can do all the things that he wants me to, and then he goes, cool, business plan, financial plan, speak, 1 sheet, great. And he can walk off with that and have those discussions with the people with influence in finance to do so, which would be really unlikely for me to secure that sort of conversation and relationship and final business deal in that respect. So it is interesting. It is interesting how it is interesting. Brody? Okay.
I mean, like I said, I have to be honest with you both. I don't want to be redundant here, but out of the last couple conversations you and I have had, Chris, and including with others, it's just I think there's something in there that all of us can't quite define. We can go through both sides of this. We can look through the lenses of leadership and collaboration and teamwork and thing, but there's a life in this kind of thing that we all feel and kind of touch. And when it's successful, and that's like the true form of that collaborative spirit, right? But for me, the more I talk about it, I'm like, I actually don't know what the fuck it means.
Well, it's but that's why that's why we're having this conversation, because there's a popular framework of brainstorming and process of collaboration, and I'm going to reason that it's more counterproductive than actually effective.
Right.
Now, and if we look at the state of the problems that we currently have to solve, and outside of business, the relationships, personal and professional, that you have, and even with the advent of AI tools, they're tools. They're not going to solve the problem for you. They're not going to solve complex problems for you, and they're never going to be able to do it in real time for things that matter. So that's going to come down to human intelligence. How are you going to work with other people? How are you going to build relationships? What's going to be effective and what's not? So as much as the AI hype and the tech thing has been, it's the same fucking slogan since the 70s. We'll design the new thing to make your life easier so you've got more time to spend with loved ones and family. And it's delivered the opposite. And that's a human failing, not a tool failing, right? So we need to readdress how we work, why we work. In the world of working from home and in-house, you'll notice that all of the principles that we talked about, none of them relied on being, I must be face-to-face. Or I must be solely remote. Like, these principles can exist wherever you happen to be in the world, So I think it's a valuable discussion. And sort of to wrap up, it's been hugely valuable, Dan, having you on board. So thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
And you're teaching stories now. You're building stories. Give us a pitch. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so go to buildthestory.com. So I help mostly startup founders, coaches, and consultants who, when they end their pitch, the first question they get is, so what is it you do? They haven't been able to put it into a way that people can actually grasp. And it has been some of the most rewarding work that I have ever done, helping great people to get their ideas into the world, to give them a fair hearing. And when they communicate via story, humans have been doing it for 100,000 years. Correct. We didn't even start writing them down until 5,000 years ago, and we started using PowerPoint about 40. So if you can communicate through story, you could be heard, understood, trusted, and remembered. It's powerful. It's the way humans communicate.
And this is a recent shift for you as well, isn't it?
It's been for about a year now. So the beginning of April, I started. I'd always been like involved in storytelling and using storytelling in my classes. But then people were like, "Can you just help me write this story?" I'm like, yeah. And then I started getting deeper and deeper into it. We had a conversation. I've got Robert McKee's book over there as well.
Excellent recommendation.
Yeah, good job. But it is incredibly powerful for transmitting ideas, for transmitting emotion, and for connecting people. It is like literally, and I don't say this very often, but literally life-changing for the people that are learning how to apply it and just getting clarity on their own lives, about their own story, and about why they are the way that they are. It's I'm repeating myself, but it's powerful.
Well, obviously I agree, and obviously I'm on board. Thank you for today. So
thank you.
Thank you, Brody. Do you know what we've got coming up next? No. So you don't look at the form. So we've got episode 6 coming up next,
before we started filming,
and then you closed it to be professional. All right. So we've got our 5 episodes out of 20 of professional relationships. We're moving on to the next 5, which is personal relationships. And funnily enough, it's going to be like, how do we date in 2023, and have dating apps ruined everything? So we're going to be 2 guys talking about dating in the modern age. It's going to be interesting. Have you got anything in particular that you're looking forward to talk about, B, or anything on your mind?
No, I think just again, kind of the theme of the Misfits is like, just give the listeners out there the permission to know that life is life, and regardless if you walk into work, it might fucking follow you home. You know what I mean? And same thing, you might walk into work, and guess what? Work fucking home followed you to work. So it's all real. You know what I mean? It's all real, and it all plays a part, and it touches together. So I'm excited to see how that plays into it for us, to where it's not just, you know, the dating and the stuff, where it's like, you know, this has thrown me off for this reason, or, you know, this has bolstered me up in this relationship, changed this perspective, or whatever it may be. I'm excited to see how it actually is kind of confluent to everything we've got going on.
Dan's happily married, so he's safe.
I'm good. I'm good.
I'm good. Yes, right.
Dan, if people want to find you to build their story, they can find you on LinkedIn at Dan Manning. Do you have any other cool links you can share?
Yeah, and just buildthestory.com is the is sort of the hub of all
Awesome.
that. My LinkedIn content is there as well, but LinkedIn's a place that I post multiple times a week, always very actionable things about storytelling.
You do. I can absolutely testify. It's like PDFs and carousels for days. So Dan is the man to go to for your story. Again, thanks for being here. In the meantime, I've been Chris.
I've been Brody.
And we'll see you on the next one. You stay classy, Misfits.
Nice job. Thanks, guys. That's
Press
killer.
stop.
I
press
did.
stop?
I did. It takes a second.
Not here.
It takes a second.